Without further ado, we will get started. Hello and welcome to our first of 4 traffic safety webinars here at SCAG. My name is Riley O'Brien. I'm with Estelano Advisors. And today we'll be talking about accessing and using data to evaluate traffic safety. So we'll start with some of the region-wide traffic safety statistics that have been collected and analyzed by SCAG. There are some pretty alarming statistics. So on average over the last 5 years, about 1,500 people die each year from traffic collisions. And there are 5,200 people who are seriously injured in traffic collisions each year. And while pedestrians and cyclists and other non-motorized modes make up only about 12% of all trips, they actually accounted for 27% of those killed in collisions, 27% of the fatalities. So that's just one of the reasons that we'll be focusing a lot on pedestrian and bicycle safety, but of course we care about safety of all modes as well. And on this sheet here, there's actually a link to the Transportation Safety County fact sheet. So you can get these statistics for each of the 6 counties in the SCAG region, the ones here for all the 6 counties combined. So in response to some of these alarming trends, SCAG offers a variety of programs, and those include the Go Human campaign, which aims to prevent serious crashes and encourage walking and biking. So this campaign provides public agencies with co-branded advertising and marketing resources to educate the public about traffic safety. And SCAG also provides a kit of parts to cities so that they can implement temporary demonstration events. So this photo on the right here is an example of one of those temporary demonstration events in Palm Desert. If you come to the webinar tomorrow or view the webinar tomorrow, on Go Human, you can learn more about this program, and you'll actually hear from one of the organizers of that event. Also, as part of Go Human, we held 4 sub-regional traffic safety workshops last month in August. We held these workshops in Santa Ana, El Centro, Riverside, and Los Angeles, and roughly 200 transportation practitioners in total attended these 4 workshops. During our breakout sessions and in exit surveys, participants talked about many of their interests and needs related to traffic safety. Many workshop participants talked about a need for better data when it comes to both crashes as well as pedestrian and bicycle counts. And as a result, we've organized today's webinar to focus on how cities, as well as community members and organizations, can use data to enhance traffic safety. So today we'll be hearing and learning from Song-Yuk Ohm, Hannah Keys, Dr. Do Kim, and Madeline Brosen. Following their presentations, they'll stick around to answer your questions. As I mentioned before, all participants will be muted during the webinar, so unfortunately you can't ask questions verbally, but you can type them into the chat. And if you have a question, you can send that question into the text chat at any time throughout the webinar. And then also at the end, we'll have a few more remarks just about some of SCAG's resources. So we will be moving on to Song-Yuk's presentation. Song-Yuk, are you there?
Yes, thank you so much. This is Song-Yuk Ohm from UC Berkeley SafeTrack. And I'm going to introduce a transportation injury mapping system, which is called TIMS, to everyone. And then we'll talk about what data we use and how user could use this for their safety analysis. Next, please. So I will briefly introduce SafeTrack and then TIMS. And then the data we use mainly, which is California traffic collision data, SWIRS. And then I will briefly talk how we geocode SWIRS data to be able to use those data into the map. And I will go over the tools available on TIMS website. Next. So SafeTrack at UC Berkeley, which is a Safe Transportation Research and Education Center, it is founded in 2000, almost about 20 years ago. which is affiliated with Institute of Transportation Studies in Berkeley and then also School of Public Health. Our main mission is to reduce transportation-related injuries and fatalities through the research, education, outreach, and also the community services. Next. So what is TIMS? People actually a little bit confused about TIMS and sealers or the collision data. But what it is really the web tool to provide sealers data, but more easy way so that the end user or any user could access the data easy enough, just go in the web tool and get the access whatever they want about crash data. TIMS is not a different data than the sealers data that California provide. We also use multiple different data sets depending on which tool. We use FARS data from federal level. We also use California road system from Caltrans. We also use highway performance monitoring system data for volume data. The program is funded by the California Office of Traffic Safety, OTS, and the tool is available to anyone at tims.berkeley.edu. Next. So I will go over briefly how sealers is constructed and how many data is available and what is available. So sealers normally called statewide integrated traffic record system. It includes every single crashes happen in California. So if collision happened on the local laws, local jurisdiction collect that data and report it into CHP. If collision happened on state highway, it is collected by California Highway Patrol and saved into the same database. In California, we approximately have 200,000 injury collision every year, and we also have the same amount of property damage only collision, which will make about 400,000 collision each year. And sealers started collecting GPS coordinates from 2006, which is included in the raw data set. But one note is that is not 100%. They are trying to improving the rate still, but a local still doesn't have that GPS. Some local collect that and report, some local doesn't. So it depends on which jurisdiction or who collect the data. Another note that I have here is road post-mile information is actually no longer available from sealers data from October 2015 due to some system changes between the Caltrans and CHP. So previously, each collision has a route and post-mile information if that collision happened on state highway, but that is no longer the case after October 2000. So there is, could you go back? I want to talk a little bit about structure. So in sealers, there are 3 tables. The main table is a crash table, which each crash will be a single record. And then there are 2 other tables, party and victim table. So each crash could have multiple party involved. If the car hit the person, there will be 2 parties. One main party will be a car. The second party will be a pedestrian. And then in the victim table, each party could have multiple victims. So the party, if one party has 2 victims, the victim table will have 2 records instead of the one party. So these 3 tables consists of the one crash in California. Next, please. So from the sealers data, in order for us to map these crash data, we geocode these crashes based on the information available from the file, each collision. So the first we check if that collision happened on state highway. If that is state highway, we check whether route information or postman information is available. If that is available, it is simple that we use linear referencing system that Caltrans use, so we can get a longitude, latitude out of those information. If that happened on highway but without the route or postman information, we actually try to guess which route is it based on the street names, and then we try to estimate real collision location based on GPS collected, and then we adjust location based on street layer as well and map it. The majority of collision which happen on local roads, we have to rely on street names, and then we also look at distance from the intersection, and also we check the direction from the intersection. After we check those, we locate collision on an intersection first, and then we trace over the route to find exact crash locations. Next. So on Teams, we have 7 different tools. Some of the tools are general purposes, and few developed for specific purposes. For example, the California Safety PM target setting tool on the top right is for, especially for the local government and MPOs to help setting the target setting for California safety performance measures. Whereas like Sweeter's Curry Map or GIS Map tool is for anyone who want to map collision around their location or California statewide or city countywide. I will go over each tool briefly from the next slide. Thank you. So the first tool I want to talk about is the Sweeter's Curry Map tool, which is a really basic tool we developed for accessing injury collision from Sweeter's data. So user will be able to choose a collision date, and user could select county and city, which city collision happened, and then they could also select which state route if they only interested in state route collision. Next. And after that, as I told before, there are 3 different table structure. So we ask user to filter collision filters or party or victim based on their interest. If they skip this part, we will just show every collision. If they choose some of these filters, the tool will automatically filter those collision out based on user's interest. For example, if user choose collision severity and check fatality only, the result will only include collision fatalities instead of every single injury collision. Next. So this is a simple sample result from Sweeter's Curry Map tool. On top, there is a summary of filter chosen from the previous set. And then we have a number of collisions based on selected filters, and we also summarize how many victims involved in that selected filters. In this case, there are no killed, but 2 injured. And we also have a summary of a pad bike because people these days are more interested in pad bike collisions. Next. And we also have multiple chart and tables based on collision severity, the type, day of week, And we also have a specific summary for the victims and pad collisions. And each table and chart can be exported as image or PDF. User also can download that data to the CSV file or to MS Word for further analysis or reporting purposes. User could also download all three different tables from tweeters after they get the result by clicking the download button on right top. There's also ability to map those crashes on a Google Maps. It is actually a cluster map, so the collision, if collision happened multiple on same record, same location, they will be clustered as the big bubble instead of one small bubble on a map. User will be able to click those each bubbles and see each details of the collision on the map. Next. The next tool we have is Serious GIS Map, which actually includes every features Serious Korean map tool has, but also have a few other features that provide by the interactive mapping tool. So the big challenging from the Korean map tool we developed was what happened if user only interested in one specific intersection from the city instead of the citywide. Before this tool, users should have opened the data into like custom GIS tool, and they have to map it, and then they have to go into that location and then select those collisions from the specific tool. It is actually difficult for normal users. So for this tool actually provide a select tool. User could go in to a specific location and they draw the circle or rectangular polygon, and they select only collision on inside of those drawing. In this example, I map every single Berkeley collision, and then user could just draw, okay, I'm interested in these areas. They could draw in, and they only can see the summary of those drawing. They could also get download from inside of that drawing. Next. So in Serious GIS Map tool, we also have few other specific tools for this tool. We have a ranked by intersection tool, which will allow user show the intersection ranking based on number of crashes. User could set a distance buffer from intersection, and the tool will automatically generate top 10 highest injury collision intersection from queried mapped results. We also have collision diagram tool. Once user select the collision from the map, it will allow user to draw the collision diagram automatically. It will read directional parties and the party involved and draw the collision diagram on the fly from Google Maps. It also has collision detail feature. It will show the street view and details of each collision if they click individual collisions. Okay, next. So next tool is ATP Maps and Summary Data. The ATP is Active Transportation Program, which is funded by Caltrans, and this tool is specifically for ATP program, and it will allow mapping all pad and bike collision from any of the selected cities, and be able to show the heat map statewide, and user will be able to narrow down some area, hotspot area, and then they could get the summary of the tool. Next. We'll also have the chart and then summary tables which will be input of the ATP funding application to Caltrans. Next. The tool will also have a feature of showing every single collision list. User will be able to also interact using the table and maps. Next. The next tool is the California Safety Performance Measure Target Setting tool that I briefly talked. It will show the performance, 5 different performance measures defined by FHWA, and it will show the trend over the years. It will also, excuse me, it will also show the 5-year rolling average, and it will also show the prediction based on the linear regression model. Next. We also have 2 other tools. The first one is Safe Route to School Map Viewer, which will allow user to choose the school from all California. It will map every single pet bike collision around school. It's an easy access tool for anyone who is interested in crashes around the school. On the right side, we have a motorcycle specific tool, which will show every motorcycle crash in selected city. And then we also showed if those motorcycle crash involved alcohol within the different icons, so that they know each motorcycle crash with alcohol involved. Next. So these are all the tools available on Teams, and we are happy to provide any feedback or question from teams_info@berkeley.edu. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And we just heard about a great source or a number of sources or a number of tools for exploring data on crashes among various transportation mode. But does this data tell us the whole story about traffic safety? It's important to think about, where are your pedestrian injuries concentrated, or where are your bike collisions concentrated? Is it just areas where it happens to be very popular to walk and bike, or are those areas actually designed more poorly than other areas? Our next presenter, Hannah Keys, will discuss some data that can help answer that question. So I will turn it over to Hannah. All right.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me here today. So I'm going to talk to the SCAG Active Transportation Database and review a little bit of why we do pedestrian and bicycle counts, what the Active Transportation Database is, sort of some best practices and guidance for how to conduct these counts, and then sort of generally how to use the database and get set up with it. So why do we do bike and pedestrian counts? It's to measure project success. If you don't know how many people were using a corridor before you do a project, before you do an active transportation project, it's really hard to say what kind of improvement it had, and it makes a much better argument for further projects if you're able to say that the number of cyclists rose after using this project. This also helps us develop accurate rates of bicycling and walking, and there are tools that Caltrans can provide that help to do that calculation from the count locations to the regional or citywide rates of biking and walking. It's also to learn a little bit more about who is using the infrastructure, and this depends on the type of count that you're conducting. But you can look at demographic elements, you can look at where people are coming from, directionality. But this also helps develop accurate crash rates, which speaks a little bit to the previous presentation, where if you know how many people are walking or riding in an area, it's much easier to understand what those crash numbers mean in a better context. So the Active Transportation Database, or the ATDB, was developed in partnership with LA Metro and San Bernardino County Transportation Authority to collect and store bicycle, pedestrian, wheelchair, and scooter or skateboard volume counts from infrastructure and planning projects around Southern California. It builds off of the former Bicycle Data Clearinghouse, which was developed by UCLA, and it expands that functionality to include pedestrian trips. And all of the former data from the Bicycle Data Clearinghouse has been migrated over to the new database. So this is the landing page for the Active Transportation Database. It has sort of two main functionalities: uploading data and viewing count data. And the link to the database is at the bottom of the page here. So before we upload the data, before we count the data, it's really important to understand how it's developed. And when you're looking at different counts, you want to make sure that it's comparing apples to apples, that the counts are done in the same way. And so SCAG has worked with Caltrans to develop very recently released interim count methodology guidance, which is specific for the Active Transportation Program. And in fact, all ATP funded projects seeking construction allocation starting at the October CTC meeting or later are going to be required to use this. But even for those non-ATP projects, it's a really useful document that I'd be happy to share out that gives guidance on, depending on the project type, depending on location and size, what types of counts you should conduct and how to conduct them. And in this way, we're able to ensure that the counts we're looking at for one spot in one city are conducted in the same way as they are in another spot. All right, so in order to conduct the counts, there are currently two ways to do so on the Active Transportation Database. One is on the left side, our mobile application, where you're able to log into your Active Transportation Database account and actually just use on your phone this mobile application where you just count, you press these little buttons. Is it a person walking, biking? Which direction are they going? And that will be uploaded automatically to the database. On the other hand, on the right, you can do currently a manual upload where you enter in each person counted. And we have these paper forms that you can download and print out to use if you're doing a manual count. And so you'll have hopefully an intern or someone who was able to take those paper counts and upload them into the database. However, it's getting better. We are in the process of developing a couple of new elements to the database, an automated counter interface. So users will be able to upload count data either from spreadsheets. So depending on how they conduct the counts, they may end up with spreadsheets that, if they're formatted in the correct way, and we can work with you to make sure that the counts are formatted in the correct way to begin with, so there's no duplicate work, you're able to just upload the spreadsheet, not entering counts for each person. So that's a huge time saver. But we're also working through APIs with select devices to have automatic connection between these either portable or permanent counters around the region, so they can speak directly to the database, and you'll just have to approve the data, but won't have to manually enter it. And that's anticipated to launch around fall of this year, so imminently. So once all the counts are uploaded, the most important next element is viewing the data. So this is sort of our GIS portal for viewing the count data right now. All of those little dots that you see are count locations. If you click on one of the dots, it'll pop up the basic information about that count, when it happened, how many bikes, how many peds, but you can also opt to open an attribute table, and that'll give you all of the details that are uploaded. That attribute table can be exported to a CSV for use however you need to use it. In addition, we've included more than 40 GIS layers for information for developing projects. So I don't know if you can see it, it's kind of small on the screen, but we have all of the ATP program requirements. We have land use, we have general transportation demographics. I think there's about 46 layers on there that you can sort of overlay with the counts to understand a little bit more of the context of what's what's going on, where these counts are happening. So in order to use the database, there are sort of three main paths. You can use it as a guest, where you just are looking at the data, looking at this page here, and you can select and you can download just as a guest. You create a user account, but you don't need to be approved for that. You can work with the database as a counter, where you are probably recruited by somebody to conduct these counts and to upload them to the database. And you can do any of the different upload formats that I explained prior. Or you can be the count administrator, where you're creating the count studies and you're creating new locations and assigning counts to your counters. And if you have any questions about what role you might want to play and how you get that set up, feel free to reach out to me. So this is just the overall workflow of the ATDB. So you create an account, you become a counter or an admin. And if you're a counter, you register with an agency that can be city, county, etc. You receive your assignment, you do your count, and you upload the data. If you're a count admin, you secure the count resources. So you find people who are going to do the counts, you find funding to do the counts, and figure out what process you're going to use. You create those locations, you create the studies, and you assign counts to your counters. And the count admin is the person who's going to approve the data at the end and make sure that it's accurate before it's finally uploaded. So that's a general overview of the active transportation database as it is now. Definitely keep an eye out for updates coming this fall to make it even more user-friendly. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you. So, we just heard about, a really great database for, storing and viewing and tracking active transportation data. Hello, does someone have a question? No. So now we'll actually hear about a great, very promising technological tool for collecting pedestrian and bicycle data, and that is actually a drone. So Do Kim from Cal Poly Pomona will take it over from here. Dr. Kim, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me?
All right. Yes.
Okay.
Great.
So good morning, everyone. So I'll be happy to share some sort of like a trial pilot study that I recently did it. So this pilot project was about applying drone technology to collect the pedestrian and bicycle data. And next, please. And a little bit of a background with this project is that, as we saw from the previous presentation, comparing to all those automobile count data, bicycle and pedestrian count data, it's a little far behind the technology and techniques and methods to collect the bicycle and pedestrian data. It's not well established like automobile count data. So from very conventional manual counting technology or technique to the sensor and video technology, and nowadays people talking about cell phone-based pedestrian collecting data, pedestrian count data, or Wi-Fi based pedestrian count data, things like that. So on that trend, I experiment a little bit how we can use the drone technology to collect the bicycle and pedestrian data. So it's a little mini pilot study. I did it. And the purpose of this project was that I want to kind of experiment a little bit that, drone technology is appropriate technology to collect the bicycle and pedestrian volume data. And the study area that I did is like a Cal Poly Pomona campus. As you can see the map on the slide, I targeted 2 plaza area and 3 plaza area and 2 corridors, which has kind of occupied by many pedestrian and bicycle volumes, traffics. Next. So what I did is that, obviously, first of all, I purchased a drone, I mean, when I purchased the drone, actually, drone has a kind of two very specific kind of like how can I, specifications. One is like a flight capabilities, or how fast and how large areas that the drone can fly, and the other one is how good camera is embedded in it. So my actually preference is the more camera specification rather than flight capability. So I purchased a sort of like a recreational drone that has a really quality of the camera. The reason why I purchased the recreational drone is that I don't want to go with a very, very extreme equipment. So I just want to, get a drone that's anywhere you can get it. It cost me like $800. Once I purchased this drone, I hired my students and fly the drone. Actually, the operation of a drone is that it's 1 hour kind of a spectrum, but with 1 hour, I was only able to collect the 30 minutes of data. So the main reason for me to collect those 30 minutes data for the entire 1 hour is that mainly the lifespan of a battery. So this recreational drone has only 20 minute maximum and 25 minutes of battery span. So what I did is that I started at noon. I prepared all those equipment for 15 minutes, and I fly the drone for 15 minutes and collect the data and bring the drone down to the ground and replace the battery and data transfers and everything. And at 12:45, I fly back to the drone and collected the 15 more minutes of data. Next. And how I actually ideally, it would be ideal for me to show you guys like a video clips that I collected, but I mean, due to the size of the video clip, I'm not able to share that video clip with you. But how it goes is that my drone is like hovering at one point, and then it just recording the video. So the screenshots that you see on your right hand side is like the sort of like an entire video clip. So only the difference is that people is moving around on the street. Next. So I was able to collect 2.5 hours worth of videos, and I counted it number of pedestrian and bicyclists from that video clips. So as you can see, it's total 2,831 people was counted, and little more than 100 bicyclists was counted. I mean, not only counting the bicycle and pedestrians, but also I was able to see the kind of detailed characteristic of those pedestrian and bicyclists. So for example, I was able to see the genders and if these pedestrians walk as a group or walk by him or herself or carrying luggages. I mean, bicyclist side, I was able to see, they wear helmets or they travel on the right direction. So sort of a detailed characteristic of this pedestrian and bicyclist. The biggest challenge is that identifying the gender. So for example, about 5.6% of pedestrians, I was not able to identify their gender. And bicyclists, these are about 11% of bicyclists, I was not able to identify their genders. But other than that, it's drones, high resolution video clip from the drone kind of delivers good information for me to recognize all those detailed characteristics of the pedestrian and bicyclist. Next. And so if I compare sort of the pros and cons of drone technology in terms of collecting the bicycle and pedestrian data, is that the pros of the drone is that obviously it can cover much larger geographic area. So if you compare to all those technology on the ground, like manual count or sensor technology, the area that drone can cover is much larger. And also it is a good way to see the details of complex travel patterns. So, I mean, on the corridor or on an intersection, pedestrian and bicycles travel flow, it's very simple. I mean, the one directional things, but in the plaza areas, the pedestrian movement is very complex. But I mean, drone technology was able to identify it and capture all those details of the complex movement. And Depending on which kind of technology or method this drone should be compared to, I mean, drone can be cost-efficient method because it can, one operator can fly the drone and it can cover much larger area. I mean, we can see a little bit of a detailed discussion on the next slide. And also, go back. So, also another pros is that the video clips deliver very near orthogonal views. So what does that mean is that, that the video and images collected from the drone can be overlaid with all other GIS data very well. And on the other hand, there are several cons was identified also. And first of all, obviously the regulation. I mean, there's very clear no-fly zone regulated by FAA and so many other municipalities. So we got to be a little careful with, flying drone in the area that's regulated by this organization and agent. And obviously rain, snow, wind, and nighttime is not a good environment for the drone to fly. And battery span, I pointed it out earlier, and battery span is a kind of technical difficulty. I mean, soon all those technology and the industry gonna get over this difficulty, but there is still the technical difficulty related to the battery span. And tree was kind of the issue. I kind of envisioned tree will be huge hassle for the drone, but seems to me it was not that terribly difficult. I mean, if we're talking about dense forest area, obviously drones not gonna play a role in collecting the data. But in the plaza area, as you can see on your right-hand side, I see the 3D sequential screen captures so that the person in the circle is walking down to the south. So in one moment, he goes under the tree, so the drone cannot capture the person, but next shot and next couple of shots, and then he's kind of coming out from the tree. So I was able to detect this person's travel trajectory very accurately. But I mean, in dense forest area, obviously that's the cons of the drones. And speaking of the data, post-data processing, just counting how many people are there and then kind of measuring the detailed characteristic of the pedestrian and bicyclist, it took me like 30 to 35 minutes for the 15-minute footage. So a little bit of extra post-processing time we need when we collected data with the drone. I mean, there is image detection technology out there, and then if we use the image detection technology, this post-processing time can be dramatically reduced, but still we need some post-processing. Next. So if I compare drone technology to the existing counting method, I mean, I kind of compare this drone to a conventional manual counting and sensor technology and video technology, and every kind of like a popular counting method out there. And how I see is that drone has great advantages in terms of field of view, which mean, again, it's kind of covering large area in one shot. Also details of data. I mean, not only the counting the pedestrian and bicyclists, but also collecting the detailed characteristics of them. And cost-wise, cost can be, we have to discuss the two different costs, which is the short-term cost and long-term cost. But I mean, short-term cost, the drone has great advantages, but in long-term and large application, the application for the larger areas, like a 24-hour data collection and 365 days of data collection, obviously drone has a limitation. So, I mean, obviously the drone has pros and cons, but it seems to me drone can be a reasonable device and technology to collect the bicycle and pedestrian and bicycle traffic volume data. Next. What I did actually on the top of that, just collecting the bicycle and pedestrian volume data, what I did is that I tried to convert this data into the spatial temporal GIS data. So what I did is that I captured the screenshot from the video clip for every 15 seconds for the pedestrian and 5 seconds for the bicyclist. So I measure exactly where these pedestrians and bicyclists are on the ground every 15 seconds. So I was able to detect where they are exactly. So, and then I can drop the point on my GIS systems where they are. So if you take a look at the screenshot on your right-hand side, I mean the individual on the circle, and then I dropped the point right at where that person is at 15 seconds, like at noon or 15 seconds, so on and so forth. So I was able to actually identify very specific location of the individuals, and I was able to drop the point at that specific location. Next. So this is the sort of an example of like a point cloud that I converted this video clip to the GIS data set. As you can see, the large group of like a point cloud, that's every single location of every single pedestrian and every 15 seconds, right? And if I have that data, and next, if I have that data, I can convert that point data into the movement data. So that line features that you see on the map representing one individual person's move. So I can, convert simply using GIS technology. I can simply convert that point cloud into the line data, so we can see the movement and kind of a trajectory of the travel patterns of the pedestrian and bicyclist. Next. So kind of let me wrap it up of this presentation, where and how we can utilize this kind of data and information. So first, what I can see is that drone technology and all those video clips were collected from the drone will help us to analyze the pedestrian activity in the park or recreational area. Especially, I mean, this area is the kind of like, the plaza area, had the very complex movement of the pedestrian and bicyclist, unlike any intersection or corridor. So, all other existing method and technology be a good option to collect this complex movement of a pedestrian and bicyclist, but drone can do. And next application I was able to think of it is that this pedestrian and bicyclist speed. Nowadays, I mean, the norm of the pedestrian speed is like 3 miles per hour walking speed, but I'm not a big fan of that pedestrian speed. So if we use this data, we can calculate pedestrian speed by a lot of different characteristics. For example, female pedestrians walking speed must be different from the male pedestrian walking speed. If we use this data, we can calculate very accurate pedestrian speed. Another place that we can apply this technology is that safety analysis for the active transportation, especially when conflict occurs between bicycles and pedestrians. This conflict or this collision actually not reported to the policeman. I mean, typically it's very minor. There's no severe injury over those pedestrian and bicyclists, but that's why this kind of accident does not report it to the police. But still, this is conflict, and there is like this kind of event or conflict can be a burden of the pedestrian and bicyclist travel, and so these kind of things can discourage their travel. So this kind of analysis we can do with the drone technologies. And social path analysis. I mean, this is another very interesting application of this drone technology. If we go back to the previous slide, please. So you must be able to see those 2 or 3 lines that across the lawn, right? Those people don't follow the pedestrian path, but they cross the lawns and they created their own path, right? So this kind of path, if next, this kind of path was we call social path. So we can, I mean, if we collected this kind of pedestrian movement data using drone, we can analyze, this social path, and we can kind of, plan the pedestrian path for the future, right? So those kind of application I was able to think. I mean, obviously this is a pilot study. I mean, if I have a chance, I'll be expanded this pilot study, and I want to test the drone technology in much broader, geographic context. So we'll see how this technology will be evolved, and this kind of research will be evolved in the future. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Kim. As we just heard about, now we have sort of talked about several databases and data collection methods for, collecting information about pedestrian and bicycle safety and activity. So now our next step involves using that data to enhance safety. So for that, we'll be hearing from Madeline Brosen. Madeline, are you there?
Yeah, great.
Great. All right.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. I'm going to talk about creating a high injury network for Vision Zero programs. This is a pretty very common use of a bunch of the data that we've been talking about, and it's a way to actually kind of combine everything to use the data for decision making. Next slide, please. So I think some of these points have been made, but I think it's useful to kind of think about, before diving into the data, what do we know? And when we think about a collision, speed is the most influential factor in dictating, especially crash severity. So unfortunately, we have traffic-related injuries that happen all over our transportation system. And the main goal of Vision Zero is making sure that no one dies in that. So really thinking about how to deal with and handle some of the collision data, thinking about the severity of crashes is very important. And I think, as I mentioned, collisions involving pedestrians and cyclists have been on the rise since about 2000, so over 10 years, even as vehicle collisions are decreasing. One important thing to remember, or to kind of think about in terms of context, is that while we're really fortunate in California to have the Berkeley TIMS database, looking at these data from police reports dramatically underestimates traffic-related injuries. So in San Francisco, because of their city-county model, they're actually working with their hospital providers to actually look at what do we know about traffic-related injuries from hospital records. And as you can see in this quote here, they say a significant number of pedestrian and cyclist injuries are not captured in the police data. So I just kind of want to put a couple of those points out there as important context. The last part of this, as you're trying to put together a high injury network, is to think about, well, what's the actual network data that you would need to know to really go along with this? And the first one, and the point here, is that the non-motorized volume data, the bike and ped counts, are incredibly important. And I want to thank SCAG for continuing and building on the database that we built with them a number of years ago, and to really encourage anyone listening to this to really prioritize actually collecting those data. Because as we're looking at these collisions, without having the volume, we don't really know about whether something's a high incident, high risk, or high incidence, low risk. So that really depends on how many people are actually walking or biking in that location. The other types of information that would be helpful that I think are less commonly included in network data are sidewalk information, so basic information about pedestrian infrastructure, and crossing locations. So because our street network data is fairly basic, we only really see intersections where two streets intersect. Particularly in suburban locations or anywhere with long blocks, you likely have mid-block crossing points, and that's not always characterized in the actual street network data. And the last point I'll make before kind of getting into how you go about this is to think about, if we know that speed is the most influential factor, having speed limit data in our street networks is really important. It's not super common, at least on the public access publicly accessible data to have this, but whether it be speed or something that could approximate speed, like the number of lanes, all of these kind of 4 points I want to say would really be useful in having a really high quality network to actually attach these collision data to. Next slide, please.
Madeline, it's Riley. You're sounding a little bit muffled at times. Is it possible to speak a little bit closer to the mic, or it sounded a little bit better recently. So.
Okay. Is this any better?
It sounds about the same.
Okay.
That sounds a little bit better, actually.
Okay. I'm just trying to correctly.
You could try using a headset.
Okay.
If that's not available, I think.
Is this a little better?
Yeah, that does sound a little better.
The tricky part is that I'm trying to use the computer microphone but not get feedback.
Right. Yeah, that's always a challenge. Okay. Yeah, I think it sounds fine now. So we'll move on.
Okay, great. So if there's any points, audio quality, please put them in the.
Okay. Yeah, it sounded much better there. So.
Riley asked me to speak to this because I actually wrote a paper a few years ago to really think about what are the different types of decisions which you need to make as actually creating and analyze collision data. And the point I'm going to make here is that there are a variety of objective and subjective decisions that you need to make in this process, and how you actually make those subjective decisions of what to include ultimately affects the results. So here's just 4 different examples of how this might play out, looking at kind of an area-based map and looking in the city of Los Angeles. And you can see that if you look at all the collisions versus, normalizing them in different ways, whether that be by the area they happen or arterials as potential proxy for speed or population, you get slightly different results. So I've linked that paper here if you want to learn more about that. That's specifically kind of at areas, but it does go through a number of the different ways you can think about this. And when I wrote this paper in 2015, take a look at a little bit about how some of the different city Vision Zero programs are going about that. Next slide, please. So where can you actually get started? If you want to prioritize locations on your network to deal with high entry locations, we've heard about the SWITR's database, and that's obviously in California cities the best place to get started. One thing is to think about if you take a limited period of time of data, you could get results that might be spiky or kind of seasonal. So the guidance is to use the most 5 years of recent data. And right now that's up through 2015. Maybe during the Q&A, we can hear a little bit about when the timeline for the provisional data. The most 3 years of data in SWITRs which are available are provisional. So I would, the recommendation is to use stuff that's finalized. You can see here, you also have the opportunity before you even get the data to just kind of exclude some criteria. So particularly for municipal programs or city, they're more focused on local streets, so you can go ahead and exclude the interstates. For this example, I'm going to be showing some of just pulling the Long Beach data for the past 5 years. The UC Berkeley has done an excellent job at making these data available, and I think it's really easy to take that for granted that they're taking these paper forms and making them into a really easy to query database. But there is not everything can be matched. So even if you download all of these data, just be aware that some of the collisions that might have happened in that city during the time period you're interested in may either not have a location, or the location might not be perfect and they might fall out of your jurisdiction. But overall, what I've seen is the majority, when you pull them, will have location information to analyze. Next slide. So before even kind of doing the spatial analysis in some type of GIS software, you have a big opportunity to actually just look at spatial information in the data itself. And I teach a GIS class, and definitely in that class and with my research assistants, I try to emphasize the point of getting to know your data and just understanding what it's really, what patterns are emerging before really diving deep into analysis. So there are, like I mentioned, the crash severity, that's located in the data without going into the GIS part of it. But there's spatial data that like where the location happens, so intersection versus mid-block, and then it also just has a street name. So in this example here, I'm just taking a look at the collision severity and looking at whether the injuries are happening at the intersection or mid-block. And in this case, they seem to be roughly half and half. We do have a higher proportion of fatalities happening at the intersection here, but overall, they're fairly kind of equal in weight here. Next slide. So I'm a huge fan and proponent of pivot tables. They're a really quick way that in Excel and without a lot of technical ability, you can start to get a handle on your data. So just by making a pivot table and looking at the location of the primary location, these are for non-intersection collisions, I can just quickly see how the majority of collisions take place on the minority of streets. So just by summarizing the collisions in this data set by street, you can see that 47% of collisions took place on just 14% of streets. And this is pretty common in almost every jurisdiction. You will notice here State Route 91, which is actually a freeway. So you need to be a little bit careful in terms of interstate in different places, just being very aware. So after you kind of get a sense of, okay, you know, where are the collisions happening, what type, then you can really start to open up GIS and figure out some more spatial analysis. Next slide. So on this Switter's database, when you query your data, you can actually just go ahead and click on the map. This is a great heat map that they provide, and you can start to see it. But now if you really want to dig into creating a high injury network, you'll need to do the analysis on your own side. So I'll go through a few steps there. Next slide. So essentially here what we have are the collisions that happened. The green ones are at the intersections and the yellow are mid-block, and just getting a sense of where they're located. The main process you need to go through is essentially attaching these collision points to streets and then finding out where are the places where these happen the most. However, not all collisions happen equally. So you need to apply some type of weight to say, well, what are the crashes that are most severe we want to prioritize in our network? And I'll go through a potential way to do that in the next slide. In the actual, go back please. In the actual spatial analysis part, I think it's important to separate into, when you're actually joining the points to the street network, to separate into intersection and non-intersection, because the non-intersection points are going to be much clearer and easy to make sure that they're assigned to the correct streets. Versus an intersection, you know, the software is just going to find the closest street, and you want to make sure that you're looking at kind of intersections slightly different. So overall, after you apply a weighting criteria, the weighting criteria allows you to say, well, how many points should we assign to this particular collision? Then what you're going to do is join those points to the streets they're associated with, and then add up essentially all of the points for collisions on that. And then there's a tool called Resolve, which essentially just says, okay, now just give it 5 streets. Go ahead, next slide, please. So this is really, you know, the weighting part of it is a very important part of the process, and it's something that requires thinking about how your particular jurisdiction wants to prioritize different factors in order to make this investment decisions. So in this example, the fatality-related crashes were given 1.5, ones in severe injury, so 50% more. A severe injury was 1.25, so 25%, and then with the number 3 and 4 are what's called non-KSI, non-killed or severely injured collisions. We just kind of did not add. I did not add any additional. Second, thinking about vulnerable victims. There's a few different ways. For simplicity's sake, in this example, I'm just saying for collisions where someone was walking or cycling was injured, gave that twice as many points in this And then when you just add those up, you can get to a collision weight for each individual point on the map. Next slide. So what you'll have after doing this process is you'll have a score for each street in your network. Now, this is going to be citywide, and as you can see, streets run really long ways. So, this needs to be an iterative process. You say, well, what portions of those streets? But what we did here is the purple lines you're seeing, that these were streets that were in the 90th percentile, had the highest points in terms of collisions, and are essentially the most dangerous from the collision data. So you can see here that the vast majority, I've just isolated the killed and severely injured collisions. The vast majority of these are located on this high injury network, and you see as a proposed kind of process here. You're seeing that there are some of them that are outside of that, but overall, you're really capturing the majority of the streets themselves. Now, this is a very simplistic version where I just kind of took the whole street. And you're kind of seeing in North Long Beach here that there's some of those that are actually on interstate, so that would need to be refined. So that you could take to say, okay, these are the streets. Where on those streets? Where are those happening? And you can kind of dig into if there are particular segments. And you can keep iterating this to get a more and more specific high injury network that really relates where collisions are happening, the priority that you're trying to give to addressing it, and where you want to make investment. Next slide. Okay, so hopefully we'll get a chance to talk a little bit more during the Q&A, but the processing, I think overall, while it's important to iterate and to make sure that you really know your data, the processing is fairly straightforward, but it requires strong decisions about how you're treating and prioritizing the data. So it's not necessarily a value neutral process. Secondly, while the high injury network tells you where that these collisions are happening, it doesn't tell you anything about why. So the more that you know about your streets and your traffic patterns, the more bike head count information you have, the more speed limit data you have, the more you can really say, well, why? Why are these particular places, the areas that are concentrating injuries? The third point is that high injury corridors are very likely to be located along major streets. But these are for two reasons. First of all, is that's where destinations are located. Transportation is a drive demand. We transport ourselves to go to places, to do things, and those things are typically located along major streets. And so that's where you're going to see this. Secondly, major arterials are where traffic speeds are very high, and those are highly related to fatalities. And the fourth point is that creating a high injury network should inspire action. So this is a great data exercise, but it should inspire investment. And I think that the point for cities is be prepared to address what you identify. So if you have future projects that are happening along these high injury networks, that hopefully this will inspire action to actually deal with the safety issues that are being identified. Okay. So I want to go ahead and thank you all for listening. And if you need to get in touch with me, here's the information, and you can learn more about our center on our website. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Madeline. So at this point, we will be directing our attention to some question and answer session. So far we have not actually received any questions from the audience. If anyone in the audience, does have questions, please type them into the chat. But in the meantime, I'll get started with just a few questions that we have. One actually was raised by Madeline, but it would be directed to Song-Hyuk. About that provisional data. So, is there a timeline for releasing provisional data? And what are some of the limitations to the provisional data that is currently uploaded for the past few years?
For the provisional data, it's actually we mainly rely on how the CHP process the data. So when CHP actually doesn't say that which year is already final or not yet finalized. So we had to determine by ourselves whether that data is finalized or not. We actually do two things. One, whether they generated a annual report, and B, whether data changes over time for that selected year. So it really depends on how CHP process, and we can only guess whether CHP frozen that year for their data purposes or not. And at this point, they are like earliest 1.5 years to like 2.5 years late, depending on which year. Right now, they are still working on finalizing 2016. So we still have 3 years of provisional data. About the limitation, the data is actually already been matured if that is entered into the system. There is not much of changes in the data once it is entered because there is no feedback loop. But the only limitation I would think of is some jurisdiction might not report collision at all or being reported late. So that chunk of the collision might be missing. But once it is entered into the system, even if it says provisional, the data itself is actually pretty accurate. It should be treated as same as final data. Is that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So another question that, this may be a question for everyone, but, specifically relates to data collection, and maybe specifically for Dr. Kim, thinking about using drones to collect data. Have you encountered any concerns about, privacy when it comes to collecting that data? And if so, how do you balance concerns about privacy with the need for more robust data?
I mean, privacy is definitely the most challenging issue, especially with the drone technology. I mean, as I pointed out in my presentation, there's very strong regulations, not only by FAA, but also by so many other municipality governments. So every actually researchers and operators should be very careful with the privacy issues. Only I just tested this drone in my campus with the special permits, and there is very limited areas that we can fly the drone. And also there is very strict elevation, altitude regulation. If I remember correctly, the recreational drone doesn't allow to go over 250 feet above. So as far as you follow the regulations and as far as you keep the regulation, I don't think there's any complexity with the privacy, but I mean, privacy is the most important factor here.
Great, thank you. This next question, I think specifically relates to SCAG and the Active Transportation Database. So, is there any sort of low-hanging fruit or first steps that cities, as well as community members or community-based organizations, could take to help contribute to the Active Transportation Database or support that effort? Like, what's the number one thing that cities could do to help?
I mean, the number one thing is definitely conducting counts, and it can be as simple as downloading the paper tallies and having some interns who work for the city or maybe working with schools to do manual counts. Also, I forgot to mention that Caltrans is piloting a sort of a lending service for portable counters, and that's should be available, I would say, late fall this year. So keep that on the radar, that if your city wants to use a non-manual count method, Caltrans has resources that they're going to be lending out. throughout the state.
Great, thank you. And then, one more question that you could direct to Madeline to start. When it comes to thinking about a high injury network, are there any limitations in sort of using that framework, or any ways that, traffic safety data in general could be misinterpreted or is commonly sometimes misunderstood?
I mean, I think that the limitation is that you only know how much you know. And so I think that I'm not sure that there's necessarily something that comes to mind that it's misunderstood. I just think that you need to know as much about why these collisions are happening, is just as important as where they're happening. So, and then the kind of response needs to match with that. So, there seems to be, even though we know speed and we know arterials, there seems to be a reluctance or less of an urgency to really address that. But I think that looking at the network helps you to see, well, where are they really happening? I think the other part that I would expand on that I didn't include is that, if there are communities of concern, or places where crashes are disproportionately happening, that's really important, and that's something that could really be layered on in terms of prioritizing. Is to say, these collisions are happening, but they're to look at the disproportion by age, race, class. That's important considerations as well. Not exactly an answer to your question, but things that might be useful to think about.
Great. So it looks like we still haven't received any questions from the live audience right now. But do any of you have questions for each other, or any additional thoughts on what we talked about today?
I have a question for Sangyeok, following up that question that you raised. Can I, if nobody gonna have any question, can I ask this question?
Certainly, yes.
I mean, this is kind of like following up the question regarding to that kind of a delay of data and provisional data issues. I mean, it sounds like I'm the big users of the Teams data and Swiss data. I wrote several paper with that data, but only the how I see as from the user point of view, the drawback is that the delay of data and little concern of the accuracy of data. I mean, that's not actually the Berkeley's problem, but that's more, the California State Highways, the data collection issues. I mean, all my concern mainly, long story short, my question is that SafeTrack has any position that have a communication with chips to improve their data collection method. Actually, collecting that paper format of report and geocoding it, and that's kind of delaying all those processes significantly. That's kind of old-fashioned way. So some advanced state, like the state of Florida, they make this data collection like a real-time database, central database, and they're using sort of like a reverse geocoding technology. As soon as the policeman click on their map at the location of the collision, they go to the central database. So they make it this collision data real-time data. So is there any kind of conversation going on between Berkeley and CHIPS and making this process a little progress?
Yes and no. So there are the TRCC meeting every quarter base supported by OTS as well. And we are part of the TRCC member, and CHP is also as well. So CHP actually piloting the electronic collision submission from local. CHP started collecting all state highway collision data from CHP, from themselves electronically with a GPS coordinate. So that data collected by CHP actually goes into iSphere's their database simultaneously. whenever it is collected. On the other hand, the local still submit a paper version whenever they have. It's up to local when they submit the paper version to the CHP. But normally, it depends on which police department handle the data. But now I know LA and Bakersfield and a few other cities is working on submitting that collision data right away, like you said, using handheld devices. And it actually goes into two databases directly, one to the local database, and the other one is CHP iSearch database. So I think that's coming. They are trying to expand that system to other locals, but I don't know ETD for that.
Okay, thank you for the answer.
All right. If there aren't any other questions, then what we can do is just talk about a few more resources that are available. So, this is just one of 4 webinars that we're holding this week. The second one is actually this afternoon at 1 p.m. Oh, I guess we do actually have a question that we just received. So thank you. So this question is for Sangyu. So you mentioned that you might guess the location of the crash based on the street name or milepost marker. At LA County, we recently cross-referenced the fatal and severe injury collisions in our database with TIMS in developing our high injury network. One thing we found was that the coordinates were more accurate in our local database because locally we were reading the actual traffic collision reports. Is there a role or channel for local agencies to assist in correcting this data?
That's actually really good feedback. We actually know that some of the local review every single crashes and edit update into their system for their safety analysis. And we would actually working on looking at those data and see how we could incorporate that for our the mapping purposes. But the only challenge we have right now is that how we actually match those with the statewide database, because many of local actually has their own unique ID, which sometimes does not match with suitors' case IDs. And number of collision actually sometimes differ depending on who processes the data. For example, local review the collision reported by police department, and if they think that collision is wrong or outside of their jurisdiction, they actually remove it or edit attributes. Then that data actually became different than the statewide database. So we actually hasn't determined how to handle those differences compared to the local versus statewide serious data. That is one challenging. Another challenging is that if we update those data for the provisional data, when we get the new updated data set, we actually have to handle already entered data differently because that data might be updated, we don't know. So there will be a little bit more consideration when we geocode those crashes. So if LA County is interested in working with us on how we can improve those data, we can probably set a meeting later and discuss how we can improve.
Great, thank you. Well, if there are any other questions from the audience, please send those over as soon as possible. But it looks like we haven't received any others. So I will go ahead and just briefly mention the next few webinars. So again, webinar 2 on implementing traffic safety in the Southern California context is actually this afternoon at 1 p.m. So if you're able to make that one as well, it would be really great to attend as well. I'll be covering you know, a lot of these same concepts, but from a different perspective. And then we have webinar 3 is tomorrow on SCAG's Go Human campaign. You'll learn a lot more about that campaign and hear some case studies of how it's really helped out cities across Southern California. And then finally on Thursday, we have a webinar that's all about statewide policy and legislation that's impacting traffic safety. So all of these webinars will be recorded and posted online, so you can view them at any time, but you know, we really would encourage you to attend on time if possible. You can register on SCAG's website. And actually on this website, gohumansocal.org is the easiest way to register. This website also has a number of other resources focused on traffic safety. These include a menu of activities that can enhance safety in your community, as well as a template resolution that you can encourage your city council to adopt that will commit them to focusing on traffic safety and reduce collisions. And we have a variety of materials, including presentations and a work plan resource that we have provided from our recent safety workshop series. So these are all online at this link here, gohumansocal.org, and then click on safety resources. If you also go to gohumansocal.org, you can take what we're calling the safety pledge. And SCAG is encouraging all cities and agencies to get on board by taking the SCAG safety pledge. You just have to click on this text that's circled here in yellow right below those stick figures. Your city can choose to participate in a variety of ways depending on the unique needs of your community. This could be anything from adopting a Vision Zero plan to hosting a pop-up safety demonstration to implementing a safety outreach campaign. You know, all of these things can make a difference. And if you sign up for the pledge, you can receive some more information from SCAG. And we finally, SCAG will be releasing the Transportation Safety Draft Technical Report on November 7th. You will have a little over 2 months to comment on that report through January 15. It's going to include some strategies that SCAG has proposed for local jurisdictions to increase safety. There will also be an interactive version of SCAG's high injury network that covers the entire region, and a number of best practices for traffic safety. So that is all. So thank you so much for joining us today. If you have any more questions, you can reach out to Hina using the email provided here. And we thank you so much for attending. Have a great day, and we hope to you know, speak to you again in the upcoming webinars.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye.